Welcome everyone this evening. I know it's a Friday evening, but it's lovely to see you all here after I'm assuming that you've probably had quite a hectic week. So thank you for joining. My name is Dr. Grace Mansah-Owusu, or you can just call me Grace for the purpose of this call. And I'll be going through some interview skills, tips, and things to think about when you're thinking about applying to jobs, what to expect, how to prepare, how to kind of bring your best foot forward in the job application process. But before I go on, I will be asking everyone just to introduce themselves. I know most of you have got cameras on, which is useful for me because I do like it when I can actually see real people's faces. So I know I'm not talking to myself. As much as I don't mind talking to myself, it's not it's not the greatest feeling. So if you are going to talk, just unmute yourself and feel free to ask questions throughout the conversation and the workshop. I've seen that Kelly has already introduced herself in the chat, so I hope she doesn't mind if I read out her introduction. Kelly has just graduated from a software development bootcamp today. Congratulations, Kelly. So any tips on interviews for jobs will be helpful. I'm a career switcher and a brand new to tech apart from this bootcamp. And then we've also got Serafina, who is from South Africa. Welcome. Lovely to see you. Lovely to meet you. So yeah, with anybody else who'd like to introduce themselves, you can either do it in the chat or you can do it live with your camera on, with your voice. So just whoever wants to go next, please go next. Hi, Sherelle. We've got Sherelle here who's just finished entry to tech, depending on what happens next. I think I might need some interview skills for the next few months or in the next few months. Brilliant. Thank you, Sherelle. Thank you for being here this evening. I'm going to just start randomly asking people. I can see that Hattie's camera is on. Would you like to introduce yourself for us? Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Hadi. I'm currently working as a graduate business consultant and UX UI designer in cybersecurity. But currently I'm in the position where I'm looking for a new role just so I can do more full-time UX and UI work. So I'm in the season of job hunting, which obviously means that interviews will probably soon follow through. But yeah, that's me, and I really look forward to today's session.
Thank you, Hadi. Lily, I know you've got your camera on as well, so I just thought I'd ask if you don't mind introducing yourself. Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was a software engineer in China, and I have no working experience in UK at the moment.
Right.
Go to the computer science, got a master's degree of computer science in China. But yeah, my English is not good, and I feel difficult for the interview. And yeah, and at the moment, I'm trying to attend some online course because I prepare my CV because there is about 8 years career break.
Right.
Yeah, it's quite difficult for me to get an interview chance.
Oh, thank you so much for joining, Lily. And I would say your English is brilliant, so don't worry about that at all. I could understand you, and I'm sure we all could. So thank you, and I hope you get some good tips. And then I'll ask, oh, there's two people that have written, well, three people that have written in the chat. So thank you, Jasmine. Jasmine is currently enrolled into the Return to Tech course. She's looking for a new role and she would like more interview skills. Then we've got Lola, who is also on the Return to Tech program bootcamp and will be applying for jobs soon. And then we've got Sade from Bath. She took the AWS Restart program with CBF, and she's currently on a level 4 apprenticeship, but would like to develop her interview skills a bit more. And then we've also got Candice, who is a career changer and was passed on the event by a friend. So lovely to meet you all. We also have Sophia, who completed the AWS Restart and currently upskilling in digital forensics and cybersecurity to get a full-time role. Brilliant. Sounds fantastic. Some of you might have been on this course last year, I think, but it's always nice to have a refresh because there's a few names that I recognize. But like I said, I'm just going to go through a few things. I will ask you to communicate with each other and also just to share examples and, you know, share experiences, because when I run these workshops, it's not all about me. I'm not here to just, you know, talk at you. I really like to get people to contribute, and there's so many people on this call. I'm sure all of you have got some really good examples or experiences that you'd like to share. So I try to encourage a peer-to-peer learning kind of platform and encourage you all to kind of keep in touch with each other as much as you would like to as well. So don't see it as like me talking and you just listening and getting bored. Because it's kind of late in the day, try and be as interactive as you possibly can so everyone can get the best out of the session this evening. Hi, Sinam. So also we've got someone in the chat. So Sinam's just recently finished the entry to tech CBF bootcamp. She's a career switcher from medicine. Very interesting. Sinam, I'm going to be asking you lots of questions, as well as a lot of other people, because there's quite a fair few career switchers and career changers, and that's what we like to see. So congratulations, everybody, for finishing or nearly finishing your courses, or however you got here today, because it's not easy to complete courses, especially in a specialism that you're not familiar with or is new to you. So yeah, basically, how can we then use these skills and your existing skills to ace interviews? So what is an interview? What are they for? So, you know, when I do workshops, I also really like to talk about the past. So interviews, first of all, are structured conversations. They're usually one way, and it's usually the employers trying to get the potential employees to show themselves and how they're suitable for a role. So they want to find the best person for the role, the best fit for the role. Job interviews started in around the early 20th century, that's in theory, when Thomas Edison created a written assessment to assess knowledge of candidates. Before then, people just inherited their roles, allegedly. And also during like the 19th and 18th centuries and 17th centuries, lots of jobs also came out that didn't exist before, a little bit like what's happening now. A lot of people are talking about the digital revolution and how things are becoming automated and optimized. So there's going to be jobs that people's children and grandchildren are doing that don't exist now. So based on that, there has to be a way to find the best person for a job, right? How do you do that? People decided to start asking people questions and interviewing them. So that's a little bit of the background to what interviews are. When you're in an interview setting, and again, I'm going to either ask people at random or I'm going to ask everyone just to share if they feel that they should. If I don't get enough of those, I'm going to ask people at random. What are the things you worry about when you hear the word interview or when you're thinking about an interview? I'd like to hear your voices. That would be really great.
I might jump in.
Thanks, Abby.
So I think one thing for me anyway that I worry about with interviews is like the nature is all about kind of showcasing and maybe selling your skill sets and your experience. And sometimes it doesn't maybe come as second nature to kind of be like, these are all the things I've accomplished. And especially when you think about like obviously like things like the STAR format, which are like very much structures which are kind of shouted about when it comes to interviews. When you're talking about maybe like some of the results and how you personally have like made an impact, it can sometimes be difficult to be like, this is like, I was the person responsible for X. Like sometimes you might be like, oh, it was us as a team, but how do I take that onus and shout about my achievements the loudest so that also people can hear them and be like, no, that's someone that we want to bring on our team, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, and that's what people struggle with a lot. I've been on the other side of the interviewing panel, and it depends on who the interview panel is, but they'll try and, if you are using we a lot, it's like, okay, well, what did you do? What was your impact? What was your, if you weren't there, what would have happened? Like, how are you integral to the success of that task? So it's kind of I don't know if anyone's seen any of The Apprentices, but that's what Alan Sugar says at some point. I think he says it when they're doing the leaving interviews. Like, you know, what was your task in the role? Like, why shouldn't I fire you? So really, it's the opposite. Why should I hire you? Like, what difference would it make for you to be in this organization, and what difference would it make to you for you to be in this role? So thanks, Hadi. Really interesting observation. Can I get 2 more points? What are the things you worry about the most when you think or start imagining what interviews are?
I'm nervous about the oh, sorry.
No, you go first.
Who was that? Kelly or Serafina?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Serafina. I'm nervous about the technical tests. So in my career before, we had to sometimes do projects, but it's quite different to like an on-the-spot technical test.
Yeah.
So that's pretty terrifying.
I'll be talking a little bit about assessments and tests and all of those things a little bit later, but thank you for pointing that out. Serafina.
What always, let me just say, every time I go for an interview, my biggest worry or fear is that I'll prepare so much that when I get to the interview, all my answers just somehow vanish to nowhere. So then when I get home, I will be so terrified and beat myself. I could have said this, I could have said that. I'm not sure whether it's anxiety or what. So, but I think that's my biggest worry of getting into that room and, you know, information just so much disappears in my mind.
Thanks, Serafina. And yeah, that is common when you're in a stressful situation, when you're under pressure. Oftentimes, there's lots of different things that are going on, and everyone is different. So for some people, they will forget things that they know, and then all of a sudden, you don't remember words. You don't even remember the day of the week. You don't know your own name anymore. And you're like, what's going on? And oftentimes, it can be anxiety, or it can just be, you know, your kind of brain function shut down because of you're putting yourself under a lot of stress. Grace, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question. Is there any other way to selection without an interview? Is there any other way apart from this assessment? Because I'm a person that's like the same way that Sarafina said. I'm the same way, and yeah. Is there any alternative, like maybe for instance, maybe job trial or something like that? Is there any alternative like that? Yeah, what's that?
Thanks, Grace. That's a good question. So I don't know why and how this happens. Obviously, the slide before, I talked about how interviews became common, and then it became best practice. Now everyone interviews, but actually, when you look at the data for selection methods, and interviewing is one of them, interviews are not on their own the best predictor of job performance. They're actually not, because people can present themselves and impression manage as much as they can and want. It depends on how adaptable people are to that. And then the hope is on the employer side is that you present yourself in an authentic way. So you start the job and you'll be as who you presented yourself at the interview. But it's not, in terms of validity of interviews as predicting job performance, it's not the best measure. So you've got other measures that go along with interviews. For example, technical assessments, psychometric assessments like personality and on-the-job tests or assessments. Then you've also got you might have an assessment center which will include interviews, panel interviews, as well as individual interviews, as well as you might get a presentation to do. But most of the time, unfortunately or fortunately, interviews, either virtual or face-to-face, will be an aspect of the selection process. But one way to kind of think about interviews, for those of you that get very kind of stressed and panicked about them, is really and truly it's just a conversation. They're not trying to trip you up. Good organizations, and most organizations do have standardized assessment or interview questions. They're not really designed to make you feel inadequate. So with the best preparation, you should be able to perform to your best. And sometimes that doesn't mean you're going to get the job, but as long as you're able to feel confident in yourself that you've done your best, that's what the most important thing is, really. So think of it, do a bit of reframing and think about interviews as if you're having a conversation with someone you haven't met yet. You can research their organization, you can research the interviewers, and you can give yourself enough time to be able to prepare. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But really and truly, it's just a conversation about you introducing yourself to the role. And actually, sometimes in an interview, you have the interview and you're like, oh gosh, I don't think I want to work here, you know. These people are a little bit, because sometimes you can tell a lot from the interview based on how the organization will be towards you. Not always, but sometimes it's a good interview. It's a good indicator, especially if there's more than one person on the panel. So even though they're interviewing you, you're also interviewing them. Like, do I want to work here? Do I want to work with these people? Can I work with these people? Have they responded to my questions? Because it's important to have questions at the end as well. But anyway, thank you so much for sharing about your anxieties or your worries around interviews. But hopefully by the end, you'll have at least a little bit of things in your arsenal to be able to do the best in these situations as possible. Right, so what are employers looking for? It's a good question. But most of the time, they're looking for, can you actually do the job? Yeah. And for some of you, it's quite difficult because you're new to the field. So you're trying to show and prove that, yeah, I can do the job without having done the job before. But there's a way that you can do that. They're also looking for your attitude. So it doesn't mean you're the finished article, but do you have like a learning spirit? Do you want to learn? Do you want to improve? Are you interested about the work? Obviously, everyone needs money. So that's one of the factors that people actually want to apply for jobs. But what else is there for you? Why else do you want to work in this area? What are you passionate about? What kind of makes you excited about the topic or the area of work? What do you like about the organization? All of that will help you. And it's not necessarily what you're saying. Sometimes it's about the way you're saying it. So your attitude towards the organization and your attitude towards the area. Research, really important. Look them up online. If you're applying for a job through a recruitment agency, then ask your consultant or whoever you're liaising with to give you as much information as possible about the organization. Sometimes they're not able to say names straight away. So research them. I would also highlight there's a few really good websites that you can use to kind of see if the organization is suitable. So one of them is called, well, it's the only one I can think of, but there must be more now. It's called Glassdoor. Has anyone heard of Glassdoor before? Can you put your virtual hand up if you've heard of Glassdoor with your physical hand? Virtual hand up if you've heard of Glassdoor. Okay, we've got 3, 4, 5. How many of you have used it when you've applied for jobs in the past or when you're researching companies? Got a thumbs up. A few of you. I would say if the organization is big enough, definitely look them up on Glassdoor, because Glassdoor is a website, for those people that don't know, that current and former employees can fill out, and they can basically review the organization. So you find out what it's like to work there. Some people will share other things. Sometimes it can be quite biased because people who have had bad experiences are more likely to write on these websites. Oh, and it's anonymous. So yeah, a lot of people who've had bad experiences are more likely to talk about them on a website. However, still look at them to give you an idea of what kind of place is it to work, what are the consistent themes. I just recommend Glassdoor in general, just because if you're bored and you worked for an organization that you didn't like, you can look them up on Glassdoor and see what other people are saying, because it also allows you to think, oh, actually, it's not just me. Also leadership. So it doesn't mean that every job you're applying to is a leadership position. I understand that a lot of the people on this call are career changers, but when have you shown leadership in the work that you've been doing in the past? And that could even be for those of you that are out of university or haven't had as much work experience. There's lots of ways that you can show you've led projects, you've led teams, you've led on an idea. All of those things are really important. Confidence. So what are you good at? What do you enjoy? What have people given you positive feedback about? And then write or think of the evidence to support that in yourself. So then that will give you confidence. Even if you're not confident 100%, but there's certain things that you know that you can do, and use that confidence to be able to communicate with these people in the interview as much as possible. Also talk about why you're applying to these jobs. So sometimes in the application form or the cover letters, you can talk about your motivation for applying. And you can talk about things like, you know, I've changed careers because of X, Y, and Z. I wanted to change my life. I wanted a different direction. I've always been interested in tech, but it took me to a different place, and this is where I want to focus on. So why you're applying for the role, you can reiterate that in the interview session. Don't be afraid to do that, because usually at the beginning, there's a space to do that. They'll ask you a little bit more of an open question. And then lastly, we've got successes. So I think that's what Hattie said earlier about selling yourself. It does sound very cringe. It sounds very uncomfortable, especially for people who are UK based. It's not really UK culture to start bragging about yourself at all. So if you spent a significant amount of time in the UK, it might feel really uncomfortable for you to talk about your successes in any way, because it's like, oh, you've got to be humble. No, this is the time where you don't have to be humble. This is the time where you're like, and you can do it in a way that's comfortable for you. It's not like you're just going to be saying, I'm great, hire me now. Basically, you are saying that, but indirectly. So this is where you're preparing, when you're preparing for the interviews. And again, I'm going to give you a little bit of like a way you can do that. Writing down your successes, your notable successes in previous roles. So, you know, when you made something more efficient, when you've made the organization money, you saved them money, you've created new systems, you've created new ways of working, you've created or developed teams. All of those things will be successes. And if you can attach monetary like numbers to it, or outcomes like in that you can very easily see, that can really help. I was interviewing someone yesterday, and the person was talking about when she'd left the organization, she'd implemented something, she'd left the organization, and she'd supported a team member, and that organization, the team member was still employed, and she'd like had a promotion or something. So not to say that she's the only reason why that person had a promotion, but the two things can be linked. Do you see what I mean? So it's not all about numbers. It can be about developing people as well. Hattie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to quickly ask a question based on the numerical aspect of things.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you obviously have like you've had certain successes for the company, but you might not necessarily know how that's quantified, if that makes sense. So, okay, cool. Say I'm working on a project and I've improved engagement, or maybe this might be a bad example because with social media you've got metrics to look at, but say it's like I've improved engagement with certain activities within the company, but I don't know numerically how that has been quantified. How would you go about collecting those kind of results so that you can start slowly inputting them, whether that's on your CV or talking about them in interviews?
So when you can talk to your line managers, because usually they'll have some kind of bigger remit for numbers. Yeah. So ask line managers or ask people that you've worked on projects with. That will also help. And if it isn't numerical, it might be anecdotal slash, verbal communication with regards to feedback. So if you've done a good job, maybe it's like your colleague will be like, oh, that really helped because X, Y, and Z. When you told me that, I needed to speak to this person in this team, I did, and that really helped me. So that's evidence of your like collaboration style or networking or something like that. So it doesn't always have to be with numbers. It can be anecdotal, it can be conversational as well. But it's a good question. Any other points here? Any other questions based on this slide around what you think employers are looking for and where you might struggle to show some of these things or you get stuck? Okay, all right. Well, if you do come up with any, I think someone want to say something? No, I imagine that noise. But if you do come up with anything, just let me know, but I'll move on. So there's lots of different types of interview. The most common form, I would say, is competency-based interviews. But nowadays, organizations still use them, but they don't rely on them as much. There are other types, but competency-based interviews are there to assess your skills, such as like communication, decisiveness, leadership, teamwork. So they're the kinds of questions that you get. Tell me about a time when you have worked in a team. Tell me about a time when you've been resilient, or what are your views around leadership? When have you been a good leader? What was this, what happened? So you'll probably get questions around whatever the core competencies are of the job, and you can answer them, but I'll explain how to answer them later on. That I would say is the most common, but there are also interviews where they're kind of motivational interviews. So even if you haven't done that thing before, so if you haven't had a chance to use some of those competencies in the exact same way, the question might be framed slightly differently, where it might be in a hypothetical situation, how would you use your leadership skills to create a safe environment for your team members or something like that? So it's asking you, like, think about it in a different way. You haven't done it before, but what would you do in this situation? That can also help, because for those people that haven't had so much work experience or professional experience in specific situations, it can allow you to at least talk about something, and it shows your logic as well. There are also other types of interviews, for example, behavioral interviews. So behavioral interviews are interesting, and yeah, they kind of, like I said, they're very similar to the hypothetical interviews. They ask you to talk about your behavior or think about your behavior in certain situations. Also now during the pandemic or post-pandemic, we saw a surge in online interviews. Online interviews are basically the norm now. At least at one stage of the selection process, you'll probably have an online interview. And that goes hand in hand with telephone interviews. So can you raise your virtual hand if you've ever had a telephone interview before? It's just voice. So it's literally someone calling you and asking you questions. We've got 3 people. Thank you. Kelly, what was your telephone interview like?
The most recent one was actually quite nice. I got on really well with the lady. I was actually on holiday. That's how much effort I'd made to take the call, and it was somewhere that was linked to somewhere where her dad used to live or something.
All right.
That was quite a nice connection. And it was the first part of several stages. So I don't know, it was quite casual, but I think that's just because we got along quite well.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. Chisholm, would you like to talk about your experience of telephone interviews?
Yeah, just like Kelly mentioned, it was quite casual. I think because they can't see you, but they still want to get the vibe of who you are. It was all right. It was okay. Yeah.
And what kinds of questions did they ask you, Chisholm? How long did it last for?
I think it was about 20, 25 minutes.
And
just some basic interviews like why I'm interested,
right.
What kind of experience I have, just to get an initial feel for who I am and what I can bring to the table.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, they're usually used for screening purposes, just to find out who you are, like, you know, how you communicate, and figure out if you could potentially do the role without, first of all, flat out rejecting you, which they probably wouldn't, but also without kind of, I don't want to say wasting your time, but yeah, it's kind of like a nice in between. It's not as formal as a full-on virtual interview or a face-to-face interview, but it's still formal in the sense of they're going to ask you some questions, but at least you've got time and space to be comfortable in your own space to take on those questions. Chisholm, your hand is up. You have anything else to add?
No, sorry, I forgot to lower it.
Oh, okay, no worries. So yeah, how are you feeling about the different types of interviews? So has anyone got any questions about specific types of interviews?
I have a question, yeah.
Yeah.
With the behavioral interview,
yeah,
very tricky, but how, I mean, I don't know how to structure my question. Is how will you know, I mean, the person that wants you to, that's answering the, I mean, that is assessing, yeah, that's the word, assessing your answers. How will you know is the right or wrong? Because I did one recently and I was so sure that, yeah, I mean, this is the way I'm gonna address the situation. Unfortunately, it wasn't the way they wanted it. So how can one address such a barrier? Yeah.
What were the questions like when you were in that interview, Grace? What types of questions?
It was sent to me
right
to like an assessment.
Right.
So yeah, we take that they're about list of strong, less stronger, you know, all those kind of behavior, okay, situational, whatever, yeah. So it's behavioral too, but it's a bit tricky. They will say, okay, this is a strong one, most strongest, less strongest. I mean, the way it's been structured is a bit tricky, yeah, but the way I feel I've dealt in the past, and the way I can there, but it came up that, sorry, it's not like that.
that sounds really frustrating. And I think a lot of those assessments, that one is called a situational judgment assessment or situational judgment test. It's basically a type of behavioral assessment, not always interviews. They'll have a set answer that they're looking for. What is hard for you to know what the answer is. And if you're answering based on your own experiences, it might be that for that organization, they're looking for something else. But obviously, it's like you're working in the dark. So you don't know what they're looking for. Whereas in an interview, you could probably explain your reasoning a little bit more and you would be able to communicate better. But because it's a kind of like an online assessment, it's a bit harder to do that. I would just say be as honest as possible, because a lot of the times in those assessments, there's be authentic, basically. So if that's how you would solve the problem, that's how you would solve the problem in your experience. And if that means that it's quote unquote wrong, I mean, unfortunately, it's a screening tool. So they use it to kind of like narrow down the applicants. But sometimes it can get very frustrating. So thanks for the question. I don't know if that actually answered your question, but there are a lot of online assessment. Well, there are some online assessment free practice tests that you can do. So that could be a way to practice. It might not be exactly the same assessment as these companies use, but at least it'll give you a test of the assessments so you can familiarize yourself with the format and then just kind of experiment and try to see what they're looking for. Alternatively, you can ask the employers in advance what assessment it is. Once you know the name, type it into Google and see if you can get some practice tests and do them in your spare time. Okay, so I've already said this, but I'll say it again. Things you might need to consider in an interview, researching yourself. You're probably thinking, what does that mean? I know who I am. Well, yeah, you do. But like we said earlier, sometimes these things kind of like empty out in your brain when you're in a stressful situation. And sometimes you can forget who you are and what you're about. So really give yourself keywords, give yourself a time to de-stress yourself before the interview so you're able to communicate and articulate yourself clearly. Like I said before, research the company or the organization as much as you possibly can. Look at their LinkedIn profile, look at their website, look at who works there, the history of the organization. And it's not a test. It's not like you have to memorize it all, but just write it down somewhere and leave it open for when you're in the interview. If that is, even if it's face to face, I've taken notes in, I've taken my CV into interviews before with my notepad and notes that I've written on a piece of paper about the organization because it's not a test. So yeah, you can use that as a way to communicate that you've done your research. Also, one really important thing is to study the job advert. So read it, print it out if you've got a printer, if you've got a tablet, if you've got something to annotate, highlight keywords. If there's any questions you have about the role, ask them in the interview at the end. Ask them for examples of what a day in the life of this role could look like. Ask them about development within the role. You can ask them so many things. Like you can also ask them about other people that have applied for this role and been successful. Where are they now? Are they still within the company or have they left? If they've left, what are the reasons why they left? To see if you can kind of figure out, can I work here? Are there prospects for me? Do they embody some of the values that I have? So looking at the job advert will give you a snapshot as to what it could be like to work there, even how it's worded. And then also on LinkedIn, I'm assuming most of you have got LinkedIn profiles, but you can look at people who've worked at that organization or who are still currently working there on your LinkedIn. Just have a look at them, have a look at their profile, have a look and see what kind of work they're doing, and also look up your interviewers as well if you get their names in advance, so you can ask them specific questions, and it shows that you've done your research. So yeah, you can ask them about like their path, their career path within the organization, or what they studied, if they did do degrees, whatever, how what they studied impacted in their current role and how it transferred. Things like that will show that you're keen, you've done your research, and you kind of have invested time into the organization. Are there any other things you think you might need to consider in an interview?
I wasn't going to say this is necessarily something to consider, but I think some of the things that you mentioned about like the questions you could ask, like things like, I don't know, just understanding people's career paths and their trajectories, or who's also successful or been successful with the career path that you're trying to go down, and seeing their journey. I think initially are things which I wouldn't have associated as questions that you could ask based on your research. A lot of the time anyway, especially in like maybe sessions like this, research is framed very much like, and it really does depend on obviously the industry, but it might be like, oh, maybe talk about some of the amazing projects that this company have been doing, and maybe if you're interested in them, like you could have a conversation about that. And of course, yeah, that is obviously a great way to show that research has been done, reconnect and resonate with the company that you're applying with. But I think it's just I think it's useful that you've also framed it as like that whole, like there's so much more to what research or ways in which you can demonstrate you've done that research. And sometimes it kind of feeds back to your point earlier about an interview essentially being that kind of conversation. As the most important fact, at least of what I'm taking from right now, is just showing that immediate connection and interest. Like fundamentally, we're all people, and we connect when we share similarities or we resonate with people's stories, and that's, I guess, the essence of an interview to some extent, like obviously showcasing those skill sets and why you're relevant. But the more you can create that connection and share that story, I guess the better.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hadi. That's a really good point around the connection, because they're trying to envisage you working at the organization and you're trying to envisage yourself working there too. So if they can find that there's something that makes you want to work there yourself, and also something that they want you for, then it's a win-win situation to a certain extent. Because I think passion and interest can sometimes trump skill to a certain extent. If you've got the right attitude to learn, but you're really enthusiastic and keen to work there. I think I was talking to someone, it was somebody who was on my podcast, and she said she had a friend after graduating, and she's not in tech at all. She had a friend who really wanted to work at TfL for some reason. TfL is Transport for London. It's like the London National Transport Network, usually manning and running the underground stations. And yeah, this person, I don't know why they wanted to work there. It's not like they did like a railway connected, transport connected degree, but she just really wanted to work there. So she looked for jobs at TfL and she applied, and I think she ended up working there for a while. And then my friend also worked there because she was working there. So that's, sometimes you might just want to work somewhere, and then you'll find a job in that organization and either work your way up or you get the dream role in that organization. And sometimes that's all they want to see, that passion and that dedication for the brand. Not as obviously for you guys is actually also to do with the subject area. That also helps because you're going to have to show technical skill as well. But both of those things is really important. Kelly, can you tell us a little bit more about LinkedIn mock video interviews? Because I had no idea about this.
Yeah, sure, I can tell you guys some more. So basically on LinkedIn, they have a section where you can do like studying and do like studying for, like, for example, if you want to learn Python or all these different types of things. But they also have a section where you can do interviews.
Yeah.
And basically it will prompt you with a question and you record yourself.
Yeah.
And I can't remember because I did this like about a year ago, but I think it gives you some feedback, or you can actually look at people answering that exact same question and how you're supposed to answer it.
That's brilliant. I'll also, I don't know if you can find the link and drop it in the chat, Kelly.
I'll try to find it.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant, a brilliant tool. And if it's free, even better. This is similar. I actually should have spoken about this in the last slide. Apologies. But there's another type of interview, which are video interviews only. So there's organizations that run platforms and software that a lot of you could also work for these organizations, the irony. One of them that I can think of is called HireVue. So companies buy them or consult with them. So the platforms allow you to program questions in. So you put the questions in, and then candidates are basically only interacting with the video interview. So they're not really interacting with a person. So the video interview, you click on the link, then you're given like 3 minutes to answer the question. It gives you a countdown, but you've got like 3 examples or 3 times where you can resubmit. So if you do it and it's 3 minutes, you're like, I'm just waffling, then you can resubmit it. You can delete the first one, resubmit. So that sometimes uses the screening tool. So instead of the telephone interview, it can be used as a screening tool before the main interview.
Yeah.
Has anyone got any questions? I think
Yeah, it's Grace again. What you say, I had one experience like that, yeah, for the first time. I played around it, yeah. I applied for a job and I said, it's a video. I mean, this is not video, it's just you voice, is the voice one that I did, yeah. So I did a voice on the job. I was just, the same as the question will come up on the screen and I have to respond to the voice. I think it was a project management role that came up with, and it's just, I said, wow, this is stranger. Let me just explore how it looks like. Like I said, I worked for the first time, I deleted it the second time. The third time I was able to read that, but I'm sure they will know that I'm reading it out. So, but it was interesting. I mean, it's good to know that that's another way. And it calms me down because I'm not seeing the person. It's me and myself that we are talking to each other. So yeah, which is a good one too,
yeah. And also like you've got chances as well. So if you don't feel like you did so well in the first chance, a lot of the time you can re-record it like 2 or 3 times to give you the best chance. So yeah, sometimes, and this is just really to show that there's more than one way of doing an interview now. So you might get a time when you get a link when you've applied to a job and it's a link to a video interviewing platform, and you're like, I have no idea what this is. But yeah, they do exist now. And I mean, I've done them before and they're actually not too bad. Like Grace said, sometimes it gives you the opportunity to just practice what you're going to say and feel a little bit more comfortable with how you say it as well. Any other questions or points before I move on to the next topic? Okay. So examples of questions, and I've given you a few already in the previous slide, and I'm also going to give you a chance to, in the chat, so whilst I'm talking, actually put some questions that you've had in the past in an interview, or ones that you can think of that are going to stress you out if you get those questions. Yeah, so just put any examples of any interview questions that you are scared of or you've had in the past that you wanted to reflect. Just put them in the chat, or you can just let me know. But one of the main ones is, I mean, to be honest, I've never had this question before. I don't think I have. Tell me about yourself. I don't think people ask that anymore. Forgive me if I'm wrong. Maybe it's just my experience, but it's a little bit vague. If you are going to get a question like that, it's usually at the beginning of the interview because it's an icebreaker. But it's a little bit too open. Another question could be, tell me about a time where you've worked well in a team, or tell me about a time when you've worked in a team. And this is where Hadi was talking about, like, if it is a team question, how do you talk about what you did in that team? So you worked in a team, let's say it's a group project, or just a project that you've got to get done at work. What was your actual role? How do you contribute to the benefit of the team? What did you specifically do to increase efficiency, effectiveness, etc.? So in all of these situations, you can talk about we, but focus on what you did and how you contributed to the success of the task. When you have worked on a complex problem, what was the outcome? I remember once I had an interview, and it was probably one of the weirdest interviews, but one of the best interviews I've had, even though I didn't get the job, which is really hilarious. So I walked in, I had the interview, and the interviewer asked me one question. No, maybe 2, but the main question was one question, and her question was, tell me about a time when you worked on a project. And then what did you do? What was the outcome? Did you get help? What was the help for? So it was great, actually. And she really got a lot out of me just from that one question, because she was able to prompt. And that's the thing. Oftentimes, the skill of the interviewer does show as well. So yeah, sometimes it just takes one question. And questions around projects and project management are really good because it shows that, you know, where you might have led things, where you've planned things, where you've collaborated with different people, where you've had to work cross boundaries. Sometimes you even do projects with people in different organizations. How do you communicate with them? So those project examples, I would say, prepare some of those. Kelly, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that Grace has actually put it in the chat, but I received questions where they basically asking you to say like a negative about yourself with
Yeah,
regards to like what are your weaknesses, or
yeah,
when have you handled a situation badly, or something like that
yeah.
along those lines.
Yeah, those questions are not there to catch you out. They're literally oftentimes there to show your level of self-awareness. So if you're like, I never do anything wrong, I don't make mistakes, it's like, well, you probably need to work on your self-awareness. Um, so, you know, the inevitable is we've all done stuff wrong. However, in a situation where you're in an interview, you do want to show your best foot forward, but it doesn't mean that you have to hide what makes you human. So if you have had a situation where it hasn't worked out the best, talk about what you learned from that situation and what you would do differently next time. That's those kind of like teachable moments can be really useful to help the interviewers understand how you deal with failures, or you might deal with, you know, mistakes. Again, I had an interview and it wasn't even for, it was for an internship. This was a long time ago. And it felt like they'd watched too much Apprentice because they really went in. And I think one of them was like, tell me about a time when you failed on something. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't think of anything. And I told them about me failing multiple driving tests. And I still got the job. So it's not, you don't have to hide your failures. It's literally just about what you've learned from those failures and what you would do differently next time. Yes, the next one, thanks, Grace, those questions they're asking you how you deal with difficult situations or difficult people or conflict. And I've been caught out by a question like this before. Again, I've had many interviews. And I talked about a colleague that was really annoying to work with. Well, I didn't use the word annoying, difficult to work with. And the outcome was, they were like, oh, what was the outcome? And I was like, well, I didn't really work with him again because I didn't have to. And they wanted to hear that I'd like rectified the situation and then we were able to like work through the conflict. And we kind of were, but it just so happened at the end of that project, I didn't have to work with him again. So I ignored him. Like, I didn't use those words, but you know what I mean? Like, I just didn't work with him again at the end. So if there's a situation where you've had difficulties at work with people or projects, and it's a situation where you were still able to work with them with that awareness of what their style is, what their personality type was, so you don't clash next time, that's also a good one to come back with. So you might have dealt with conflict where you clashed with a colleague, but then you might have done some research about them or asked them what the best way it was to work with them, or, you know, had a one-to-one with their other colleague to find out what makes them tick or what's going on with them, something like that, to show that even in a conflict you can still be effective and efficient. That's probably what that's probably what they want to hear. If those things didn't actually happen in real life, you don't have to make it up. If that's not how you deal with conflict, you don't have to lie about it. However, if let's say you dealt with something and it wasn't the best way you wanted to deal with it, talk about it. Like I said, like, in that situation, it wasn't the best outcome. However, what I learned from it was next time I will do X, Y, and Z. I'll talk to their line manager. I'll ask them what their preferences are. I'll talk to them about how much work they have capacity for. Do you see what I mean? So it just shows that you're reflective and that you've learned from something in that situation, and then you can use it to move forward. Another question is, and you know, I think I just plucked this from my brain, an agile way of working. So they might ask you a bit more of a technical question in there, or technical questions, and then just be honest. So if they trip you up or you feel like you don't know enough, you can just say, sorry, I don't know. Again, I've done that in an interview. They asked me a question. I had a sheet of questions. I was like, I can't answer that question, but it could be this. And yeah, again, apparently I got that job. Didn't stay there for very long, but yeah. So if you don't know something and it's a technical question, just say that you don't know. Or if you know enough or a little bit, say, I know this, but I'm not sure 100%. I'd have to look that up. I think there's another question here. How would you best define success? Serafina, can you give me a little bit more background to that question you put in the chat? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I think I struggled actually to answer this question, or should I say I panicked or I didn't have enough time. I think they wanted to know, how do you best describe success in your life? So I think if I could remember correctly, I said to me, success for me means, being able to do things for myself, look after my family. Success means being in good health. So my answer was around that. So I just mentioned this question because you just triggered one of the questions that I struggled with in my previous interview.
That's a very vague question because
Yeah.
So again, if you do get a question like that, you could ask for clarification. Can you clarify, what do you mean? Do you mean in a work setting? Do you mean in a personal setting? Because also asking people to repeat questions if you've missed it, that's fine. I think you're going to be not able to hear everything or remember everything. Yeah, those kinds of questions are tricky, but you can ask them for more clarification so that you're not going off on a tangent. Even though that's not your fault, because if they haven't defined the question properly, it's not really your fault. But you can ask them for more clarification, like, what do you mean by that? But yeah, brilliant. It's a good question because they might ask you, how do you define success? How do you define success in this role? How do you find success in this organization? How do you define success in your career? How do you define success in your life? We could go on and on. It's like a philosophical question at this point.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you were able to answer it as best you could. So well done.
Yeah. Thank you.
Grace.
Yeah, I'm just thinking in my head that if this such a question can come to me, I'll look at a situation that maybe in terms of a project environment, that a situation whereby a project is given within a time scope and within the budget, then how do you manage to get everything done despite all the challenges that come in between, maybe tough stakeholder, difficult stakeholder, maybe just maybe the software engineer fell sick and couldn't come back, all those kind of drama that happens in between. So this was the way that came onto me, depending on the job role one is applying for. So I'm thinking that for me, I'll look at the situation, what happened, and the task that I did, the action taken, and the outcome, which is the results. And at the end of the day, so far I meet the deadline and submit every report all the way to, I believe that success. More so, starting as an apprenticeship, now become a manager or senior project manager. I think that's how progression can be measured as a success in the organization. So that's the way I just thought of it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Serafina. That's a great way. Sorry. Thank you so much, Grace, answering Serafina's question with that example. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give everyone a 10-minute break because I know that we've been online for a little bit. So if you can come back at 7:41 or whatever 10 minutes is away from your time. I don't even know if my watch is correct. So 10 minutes and just turn off your camera and your microphone. And I'll be back soon. Right, everyone. If you are back, can you please like put your virtual thumb or hand up, or turn on your camera so I know that who's back and who isn't. That'd be really useful. Thanks, Sade. Thanks, Serafina. Thanks, Chisholm and Kelly and Marie. Hi, Marie. Thanks for the clap. Okay, perfect. So there's a fair few people that are back. So thank you for coming back. Thanks, Lola. So I'm going to give you a bit of a task to do now, even though we've just come off the break, but a very quick and very easy task. Unfortunately, I can't put you into breakout rooms, but it's okay. I want you to think about two strengths that you have, like two career strengths. So it could be planning, organization, communication, more technical, strengths that you have. So think of two, and then I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to come up, write something down. So if you've got a pen near you, that's great. Something, or if you've got obviously your laptop is on or your phone is on, write down the evidence that you'll need to show that you're good at that. So it could be an example from a past job that you have to show that you're good at planning and organizing, or an example of how you have shown that you're a good communicator. That could be writing presentations, delivering presentations to key stakeholders. It could be communicating to your team or being the minute taker, all of those things. So does everyone understand the task? I will write it in the chat as well in case you missed what I said. But everyone think of two skills or strengths that they have, and then use for those two key strengths, then think of examples that go along with that strength. I'll give you up to 7:48, exactly 5 minutes, to come up with two examples and two skills. If you're currently working on those examples, just put your thumb up or raise your hand so I know that you're engaged, because I can't see many people. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Sophia. Thanks, Ilhan. And thanks, Rachel. And UL. I don't know if that's your actual name, but I'm just reading what you wrote your name as. So I'll give you up until 48 minutes past. That's 3 more minutes to think of stuff. And then I'm going to ask people to share. You don't have to share, but it'll be nice. I might ask a few people to share, but if you're not comfortable, just let me know. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for doing that. I'm now going to ask for one volunteer, and then I'm going to ask one person that hasn't spoken so much, if you don't mind, to share. So anyone can just volunteer to give me one of the skills that you have, and then an example of how you use that skill. Grace.
Yeah, there was a time when I was delivering a community project. Yeah, it was a situation that we need to do a presentation to the service users.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to design the slide,
Mm-hmm.
and because it's a community that most of them have hearing impairment,
Right.
I was able to include British Sign Language at the same time as I was presenting. And it was a situation that at the end of the day, they got included, both the hearing and the hearing impaired, they were able to flow with the a presentation. And there was question and answer at the end of the slide, at the end of the slide.
Mm.
And yeah, and that's how I use my British Sign Language and my communication skills, my presentation skills in order to deliver this workshop. And yeah, it was fun, and I got a positive feedback at the end of it. Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I like that example and how you kind of presented it, because you talked about the example and then at the end you said, oh, this shows my communication skills. It also shows inclusion as well, because you included a community that oftentimes gets ignored and are not catered for. So I think that shows a couple of skills. So thanks so much, Grace. Right, I'm going to ask one person who has not spoken so much. You are allowed to decline. So if you really don't want to talk, that's fine. I don't want to force anyone. But Sinam, do you have one skill that you want to talk about and an example of using it?
Sure. I had collaboration.
Brilliant.
So at university, I, with some other friends, created a study club where essentially we'd all hold each other accountable, go to the library each day,
Yeah.
and then do a set of revision. But then at the end of the day, we would test each other. So we could help to improve everybody's answers and give feedback and also improve on our confidence. And so, yeah, I guess that's my example. Yeah.
Fantastic. And that's kind of like an example of like peer-led learning, taking initiative. There's so many things there that it falls into. And I think that's a great example to use for a number of different occasions when you have them. For that one, I would just say, talk about how you contributed to that group as well, like what your specific role was. Did you set it, if you did set it up, how you maintained it and all of those things as well. But brilliant. And I'm going to ask for one more person just because I've enjoyed it so much hearing more about your examples. So I'm going to ask LL to talk about one skill and an example.
Yeah, I didn't finish completely, but I can give you the skill.
Yes,
The
please.
skill was organization.
Uh-huh.
And I wrote down show good time management skills and attention to detail.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's as far as I got, sorry.
No, it's okay, no worries. And I think that's I liked the way that you've already started to break down the example or the skill. And I think that's really important because some of these skills are quite broad. So you might want to focus on something that you already know that you're good at. Do you see what I mean? And then just talk about that. And hopefully that's sufficient. And if not, then you can just be honest and be like, I prefer this part of the skill. I'm much better at that. And if I have to do the other part, that is where I ask for other people's opinions or support, something or other, something like that. But brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. And the reason I gave you this task is because this is how you're going to be. I mean, most of you have done this before. This is how you prep for interviews. got to think about the skills in the job description. You have a look at the job description or the job ad, look at the skills they're looking for, and literally write down examples of when you've displayed those skills. And sometimes they might not ask you about every single skill, but in terms of preparation, at least you've got those examples to support. So it's always better to have different examples for each question if you can. If you can't, because you've had limited experience or limited exposure to that kind of type of skill, that's fine. But those of you that are career changers, you can still use examples in previous jobs that are not tech related because you've got transferable skills. So that's a brilliant way of showing that you can still do the thing. Doesn't mean because you've worked somewhere else it's irrelevant. It's always relevant, and that's what the beauty is with career changers. With career changes, you've literally had a different job somewhere else, you've developed your skills, and then you can bring a different perspective into a new environment that someone who's worked there and done that kind of job for so long might not think of. So that shows how your unique selling point as a person, a potential employee. That's what I'm thinking of. I was trying to think of the word. Okay. So a couple of people have already talked about the STAR method. So thank you both, Grace and Hadi. The STAR method is a great way to answer questions in both in a cover letter as well as in an interview. So it allows you to structure your answers in a way where you're actually getting to the point. So with each interview question, let's say it's about organizational skills, think about the situation. What was the situation? What did you do? Or what did you need to do? Obviously, it's an overview. No one's asking you to write a novel or talk about a novel. You just give them as much as they need to hear. The task, what was the task that you needed to do? What was the action? What did you specifically do? So you can talk about the group. Okay, the group did this, but my task in that group was to do that. And then what was the result or the outcome? So based on this, I was able to increase, decrease, collaborate, etc., etc., etc. Right? So I'm going to think of an example now. So I can talk about a pitch. So my day job, I work for a consultancy. We have to sell our services to different potential clients. So I can talk about a situation where I was given very short notice that I needed to attend a pitch. I mean, that's like every day. Attend a pitch, and I didn't have time to do so much, background research on the organization that we were pitching to. And so I did as much as I could, went to the pitch, made sure that I spoke about the things that I could talk about. So my specific team deals with coaching, we deal with psychometric assessments, and we talk about diversity and inclusion. So I asked them questions around those topics. And the result was that, I'm just making it up really, but the result was that they not only were positive about the organization, and they decided to go with our organization, and my specific team won some work as well based on me being at that pitch. If I wasn't at that pitch, I'm not sure if the rest of the consultants would have sold our services in my particular team, something like that. So you've got a very neat kind of way to communicate and share what you have done in the past. And if they have any particular questions, if they want you to clarify, they'll ask you to clarify at different points. They might even ask you to clarify at the end, but it's a good way to put everything together. Put your hands up if you've heard of the STAR method before. I'm sure some of you have already. I know 2 people have. Yeah, fair few. Brilliant. And those of you that have used it in the past, or sorry, those of you that have heard of it, have you used it before? So Marie, you've used it, you've heard of it. Have you used it before? Sophia, you've heard of...
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Marie.
Yeah, sorry, my connection was a bit delayed. I'm sorry about
sorry.
that. Yeah, I used to before, not related with tech, but in other industries for interviews. And it helped to kind of have a plan to kind of elaborate a story.
Yeah.
And sometimes to even adjust it based on the situation or the person you have next to you. Because so make it more specific for the role and the person who's receiving it. It's not the same saying that to the manager that actually to director or investors. So you
That's very true.
areas that are more relevant for them.
Very, very true. I think what you're talking about is how adaptable it is as a model. So it doesn't mean that you only have to use it for interviews. You can use it for pitches. You can use it for conversations. Like when you're doing your appraisal with your line manager at the end of the year, using this platform or this model to talk about what you've done, what impact it's made, can be really useful. So brilliant. Thanks so much. So here's some ways you can prepare for interviews. I've already said some of them before. But the first one is dealing with nerves, dealing with stress, dealing with anxiety, putting things into perspective in the sense of, I don't want to say it's not the end of the world. Obviously, you want to get a job and you want to get a job in the field that you're interested in. So it is important to you and it's okay for things to be important. But if you're so nervous that you can't perform, like you can't even speak and you're like, really, really anxious, there's certain things that you can do to kind of calm yourself down. So be prepared for the interview, give yourself enough time, ask questions. So if there's certain things you want to know before the interview, email the recruiter, email the person who emailed you from the organization. That could be the recruitment administrator. Like if you need any extra information, definitely contact them, because it's better to be informed than not. If they don't get back to you, then unfortunately try again. But if there are things that you need or information that you would like to know, just communicate with them. Another thing that I forgot to mention is if you have a neurodiverse condition, so if you are dyslexic, dyspraxic, if you have ADHD, if you are on the autism spectrum, anything like that, if you've got hearing differences, if you've got sight differences, anything like that, tell the organization before you have an interview or before you engage in any kind of assessment with them, because it's their duty to give you reasonable adjustment. That's what it's called, reasonable adjustments. If they do not, it's a tricky one. They need to try as much as they can to give you the extra support. So that could be if you're doing technical assessments or any other type of assessments, giving you extra time. If you need specific software to be able to read things, they should allow you to have access to it as much as possible. If it's a face-to-face interview and you need, like, for example, a wheelchair, I mean, all organizations in the UK should really be wheelchair accessible, but we know that's not always the case. So making sure that you can get in the building, that you've got enough support within the organization, that they understand how it might affect your performance, and all of those things, even things down to like you might have had an accident or an incident recently that might affect your performance. You've got a bereavement. Oh, I had one, was it earlier this year? We had a candidate who literally had a bereavement like the day before, and she told us in the interview, and we just said, it's okay, we'll reschedule, because the duty of care to the person is they're not going to be able to perform at their best if they've got a bereavement of a close family member, like that they only just found out the day before. Like if you can, well, first of all, communicate that to them as soon as possible. And if they can accommodate a different date, they should really try at least. But at least you've said it. Do you see what I mean? So anything like that, communicate it to the employers or the potential employers or your agency or whoever they are, because especially if you're in the UK, because I'm only saying that because I know the UK laws, they need to give reasonable adjustments. So yeah, research your organization. I've said that already, and also research your interviewing panel as much as possible, so it doesn't look like you're stalking them, but like you're gathering as much information as possible. Planning your answers. So I'm going to give you, I will send links. I'm going to give you a template that I created a few years ago, and it allows you to do things like for different skills, write down the situation, task, action, and results. Also, it's like a job searching diary. So if everywhere you've applied to, you can write it down, what the outcome was and stuff like that. There's lots of different kind of sheets. It's on an Excel form, but it will allow you to kind of write all those things in, because then it will allow you to plan your answers. So if you've got like a template or a portfolio of like examples of teamwork, examples of communication, examples of planning and organizing, you don't have to rack your brain every single interview. You literally just look on the computer. You can even have that on a different screen if it's a virtual interview or a telephone, and then look at it when you're talking. So planning your examples or planning your answers. If you are having a virtual interview or a telephone interview, you can wear smart things at the top and then slippers and pajamas at the bottom. They're not going to see that. If you are having a face-to-face interview, I would say dress as smart as you can, or if you think is appropriate, and you can look at, I mean, sometimes you don't know. So I would say dress smarter than you think, but then also have an element of comfort. So if there's something that helps you feel better, let's say you're wearing boots, but you've got some really fluffy socks, or you're wearing your favorite hairband, or you're wearing your favorite bit of jewelry, anything that will give you comfort, even though you're looking smart on the outside, but you know you've got your fluffy socks on the inside. So that helps you feel comfortable and confident. Do that. Another thing, practice. So family, friends, work colleagues, spouses, even kids, you can sit there and ask them to ask you questions, and then you practice the answers with them. And also you can use that LinkedIn interviewing thing that was said earlier, that we've got a link in the chat that can help you, that Kelly showed. So yeah, there's a LinkedIn interview prep link in here that you can also use. And then also find out like where you need to be, what time you need to be there. Check and see if there's any strikes or if there's traffic. Give yourself enough time to get there as well, so you're not panicked that you're stuck in traffic. I remember once I had an interview, not funny at all, but my local station, a lot of people have a lot of issues. So anyway, basically I got to the station, I left 2 hours before the interview, got to the station was closed due to some incident at the train station. And at that time I didn't live in London, so I had to like go to another station that was like 20 minutes away to get on that train to get to the interview. It was very crazy. So I would always recommend leave enough time. Like even if you think 2 hours is like 1 hour is a lot, leave a little bit earlier, just because you might get lost. You don't know what's going on the roads. Yeah, try and be as prepared as possible. Any examples, any questions, any concerns based on what I've said about preparation?
I was just gonna give a quick thing that I'd seen recently, which was on, there's like this TED talk about like power poses and stuff like that. So like maybe again, like when you're going into like interviews in person or whatnot, like finding things, whether that is the power poses or things that just like give you confidence, or if it's like listening to your favorite tune. Like I know a lot of times, sometimes if I'm dealing with nerves, I'm like listening to some of my favorite artists, and then you kind of get into the mojo. Like just things like that might be helpful as well.
Thank you so much, Hadi. Yeah, get yourself a hype track. Some people, yeah, you can use music, you can use affirmations, you can watch give yourself a reward for afterwards. Plan your day around it as much as possible, so you've got enough headspace and space to perform at your best. Thank you so much. Kelly?
Hello. I have a question kind of based upon about feeling comfortable. So I had a Zoom online interview, which I think was one of my first ones, and this wasn't for tech, this was from before.
Yeah.
And the interviewer, a guy, didn't have his camera on, which I thought was a bit weird because I had my camera on and I'd already had a phone interview. So I thought then the point of a Zoom interview was that would be a video call.
Yeah.
But I wasn't really sure what to do because it was my first one. And I didn't know if it'd be rude to ask him to switch his camera on. And if he did say no, I didn't want to start the interview like on an argument. So I don't know if you have any advice on that, because it was very weird when it's just one-on-one in an interview and he could see my face and my, you know, like body actions, and I couldn't see anything. And also then if there was no camera, could it not just be a phone call?
Yeah. I mean, in that situation, it must have been really difficult. I would ask if they could turn on their camera, but that's just my personal preference, because like you said, why do a Zoom call if it's gonna if it's not reciprocated? Also, yeah, it doesn't sit well with me either. So I would personally encourage you to ask other person to turn on their camera, or ask them if they could at least, or if there's a technical issue, maybe the camera is broken, but really and truly the organization and the interviewer should have put it on. I don't know why they wouldn't. It's very weird to me.
Okay, good. I'm glad it's not just me that felt like that.
No.
It's weird. And he was a very, very technical person, because I thought maybe he hadn't realized, but I was like, no, he's so technical. And the way he was technically quizzing me about things, I was like, he must know how to use Zoom, because this is just ridiculous.
Because otherwise you're just like a random voice in the air. It's a little bit creepy. Oh no, I don't.
Okay, well, I'm prepared. If it happens again, I will definitely say, could you please put your camera on? And if you're not going to, I'll switch mine off.
Or just at least ask, like probe, like, oh, just wondering,
Kelly,
you could put your camera on.
Yeah, Kelly, one of the things I might suggest is there's a whole range of reasons people don't have the cameras on. So what might be a better approach is, if you've got your camera on, is to say, would you like me to have my camera on or off, and then operate in that way.
Yeah.
And just say, if you're uncomfortable being the only one with your camera on, then express that.
Yeah.
But rather than just directly asking, because that, you know, they know how to press the button to put the camera on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
that's a brilliant one. I think I really like that. Like, oh, would you prefer me to turn off my camera? And then maybe that will jog them into thinking, oh, I haven't put mine on.
Yeah. I've done some work in the Middle East before, and you know, sometimes there are kind of issues around you know, women kind of having their cameras on in that context. So that's where I got that from. And you don't necessarily know where people are based when they're working remotely.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. I was under the assumption that was too UK based, but that doesn't mean anything. That I mean, like you said, there could be a whole host of reasons, technical issues or something. I'm trying to think of the other things. Extreme introversion, but yeah, thank you. Grace.
Just a quick contribution, yeah. So at the end of the interview, in the middle of the interview, one can answer when they say, well, is there any question? Just say, is it, I mean, the way I feel like that, is it the company policy in terms of data protection to not to put the camera on, or I mean that's the situation that, I mean, that's what came to my head, that is it one of the organization policy that interviewer shouldn't put the camera on? So, I mean, with that, there might be a prompt and explanation. However, if there's any issue, you should have said, my apologies, and introduce the issue at the beginning to say that there was a problem with the camera and so on. Because I remember sometimes ago when I went to travel to Nigeria, and I was supposed to be teaching with camera on, and there was no light. So that's another issue. Yeah, you understand what I mean? So it should have prompted you to say, my apologies, I won't be able to have this camera on. Are you comfortable, or we should put it to another day or something like that? Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's another way to approach that. Is this a company policy, or there was an issue? Because he might not know, to be honest with you. Yeah, I might not be aware, no matter what technical. You might think it's a technical, I might be reading things on the paper out to you, that you might think that is a technical person. You understand what I mean? I mean, there's a lot of things around, yeah. So yeah, that's what I just want to bring out here.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks so much. I've got a question in the chat from Kelly. Kelly, you're asking very juicy questions, but no, this is actually a really important question. Any advice on answering salary expectation questions? This question always catches me off guard. So, oftentimes the job advert, not always, but hopefully the organizations you're applying to will publish a salary range. Hopefully before the interview, you would know what the salary range is. That's the ideal situation. Also look at similar jobs. So in your research, look at similar jobs and their salary expectations. I think you can do that on Glassdoor as well. You can look at, and I think even LinkedIn tells you for similar roles what the kind of area, what you should be looking at as well. So when you're answering salary expectations, I would definitely say don't sell yourself short. I've done this before, where you're like, oh, I really want the job, so let me go in low. Or it could be advice from recruiters telling you to go in lower. But if you think that you're worth more, I would at least go in the middle. And if you've got stronger evidence to say why you should be at the top of the band, because sometimes some company organizational policies, they'll put the upper band in, but they might not ever offer people, this is what they say, might not offer new starters with the upper end. So going in the middle at least could be a compromise. But yeah, look at the salaries with similar roles with a similar size organization, and also base that on what you currently have as well. So if you, and then that will give you an indication of what kind of number that you're happy with and what's also realistic. Because sometimes you get some organizations where they're a lot smaller, they're not in a multinational, so they might not be able to offer you as much as a bigger organization, and that could be their cap. So even though in the market you could get a lot more, it might be that they aren't able to match a salary of a bigger organization. So that also is something you need to take into account, like where you're applying to and stuff as well. Does that help, Kelly?
Yes, that helps.
I've got a question in the back of that.
Yeah.
As a career changer, to what extent does it apply to me to base my my salary expectations on my current salary? Because I feel like I haven't got much value to add to the company, but then I'm also at a point where I can't really, go into a different career and then completely, reduce my living standards as a result of that. If that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And yeah, you've got two things there. You've got like the practical of like you need to eat. You don't want to take such a career, like a reduction in salary where you're really suffering. But at the same time, you said something. You said, I don't have much to offer. Well, if they've got a role and you're applying for that role, then you fulfill the criteria. So you do have a lot to offer, because otherwise you wouldn't be considered for the role. Do you see what I mean? So look in the middle for people who have like the same level of experience or amount of experience in the new industry that you're getting into, but also you can increase that slightly because you're not brand new grad coming out with like, not so much responsibilities, quote unquote. Obviously I'm generalizing here. So I would definitely think about a few things, and then just whatever the salary is saying, try and fit within those constraints, if that makes sense, regardless of if you're a career changer or not. If the job is advertised for that, the job is advertised for that, regardless on whether you're entry level or not. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, sort of. I guess I've come across a lot of roles where they wouldn't advertise salary at all, and then you have to come up with a number, and that just makes it so
Yeah,
difficult.
yeah. In that sense, that's what I'm saying. When you're doing your research, you'll look at for any role that does have a salary, use that as a benchmark to then at least say that, oh, I've seen other roles, this is what they're asking for. So I know I'm not way off if I'm asking for like, some other number.
Yeah, just to quickly jump in, like Grace mentioned earlier about Glassdoor, like they show you the actual average salary for whatever band that you're applying for. So if you're an entry level for, I don't know, so in my case, UX design, entry level UX designer, what the average in whatever location you're based. So for me, London is, and then like if you're looking for mid-level or senior and stuff, so then you get a gauge, but then it will also show you the different companies and what their I guess what's it called? Yeah, they're offering at that same level is. So then you can use that either if you look at the average and you're like, actually this works for me, you can use that as that benchmark and maybe either go higher or lower based on that. Or if you're worried about that average being maybe either too high, for example, you can look at the ones listed from the companies and then gauge based on their sizing and like, just their structure, whether that would work for you. So for example, if you were interested in applying to a smaller company, but you saw a lot bigger companies are on the higher range of that average, then maybe, okay, cool, your expectations might be lowered a little bit because you have to factor in as a smaller company, they might not have as much budget to be able to afford those bigger things. But then maybe if you're looking at those bigger companies, you might then just kind of push it slightly up, because then if anything, you kind of shoot higher and then you negotiate down and then you've met the standard that they're usually offering, so you can guarantee that you get something that you're at least happy with. I don't know if that's helpful advice, but that's at least an approach that I'm thinking of taking in that regard.
Yeah, and I will come in with what Adi say, and with Sophia, I face the same challenge, but what I always do is that I look at what I was earning before. I look at my confidence too, that if I apply for this role and if I'm applying for this same salary, will I be able to perform? So, and that way, and I always look at the entry level, same way as Eddie was doing, I do a lot of research that, okay, for this time, entry level in this place in UK, what does it say? I mean, there was a time I was looking for a role in Canada, and I was looking at what are they paying at that same level in Canada. So with Glassdoor, I was able to gauge myself that, okay, will I be happy with this? One thing about me, when I'm budgeting myself, I always budget higher. So there'll be room for negotiation in order to meet the benchmark, as what Eddie was saying. So there's various ways of doing it. Like, I mean, it's true that we are all transiting, we are all new in this tech thing there, but still, it requires some, goodness to ourselves. So it's better, one look at the benchmark that you are not losing and you are not increasing your expectation, you understand? So that's just the way I would address the situation. Yeah.
Thanks, Grace, and thanks, Hedy.
Thanks, guys.
We've got a question here in the chat. I like this question. I'll try my best to answer it. What's the thinking behind companies asking you what your current salary is? I think in the past, different roles, it's just asking you to, because on one hand, you could say it's kind of discriminatory, especially if you're being grossly underpaid somewhere else, and then you tell them the amount, and they think, oh, we'll just have to give them maybe $1,000 more and they'll just come over because they'll be so grateful. So on one hand, you can see it's discriminatory, but as Kelly said, they want to know if they can meet your salary expectations exactly. Sometimes, I remember, again, I applied for a job. I think I applied for the job because I wanted the job and I saw the salary expectations and I was already on higher than that. So I tried to negotiate with them, but they couldn't go as high as the job I ended up taking. And that wasn't really the main reason why I went for the other job. If it was, I just wanted to work in the other organization, but yeah, it's to gauge where you are. Yeah, you're right. If you are going for different work, it's not necessarily always helpful, but yeah, if you if you don't want to disclose, it can be a bit tricky because you don't have to disclose. There's nothing making them give you that. You don't have to give them that information, but it could be quite tricky in terms of like how they're going to perceive you, which is annoying because you shouldn't necessarily have to tell them. However, I think they just want to know what your general salary expectations are, if they're in line with industry or if they're like way off, or at least what your last salary was. And you can just say to them, like, I believe in my last role, I actually was underpaid because based on salaries, the benchmark for that kind of role that I did my research on, and I asked them for a salary increase and they didn't want to give it to me, whatever. Do you see what I mean? So if you wanted to kind of tell a story around it, you can, there's nothing stopping you. But technically, I don't think it's a legal requirement for you to tell them what your salary was. But again, I suppose it can be seen as a little bit obtrusive if you don't. To Grace's point, they might not be sure, but like if they're advertising a new role, they should benchmark to find out what that salary is. That's their job.
Yeah. Another issue is that depending on the organization, like some sector that the funding is running out. So there's another thing that they will want to know if what they have left can be able to pay you, and rather than that you, they want to know that what can they offer you at the same time. That can come into, yeah.
And also person that's just put in the salary question said that sometimes it's mandatory. Just with the salary, past salary, I think a lot of organizations are moving away from that now. Not always, but it can be that they'll ask you for your salary expectations, you just benchmark that. But if they're going to use it, ask you what your current salary is, then use your discretion, use whatever you feel comfortable doing to do that. Oh yes, sorry.
No, sorry, I was just gonna say that as well, if you just feel really uncomfortable around the whole salary thing and people or companies, sorry, are not disclosing that information from the start, then maybe you could use that as one of the benchmarks or boundaries that you draw in terms of like companies that you do choose to apply for. Just because if they're not transparent from this jump, it's kind of maybe then reflective of other elements of what the company might be transparent about or not. But yeah.
Thank you so much. Also benefits. So even though they might not be able to match salaries, there might be benefits. So flexible working, it could be working from home, it could be tech that they can give you access to, it could be the fact that you're going to be exposed to different types of people when you work in your new role. It could be buying more extra holiday. It could be company shares. Like there's so many things. Just have a look on their website to see what kind of benefits that they list, and then you can use that to negotiate or ask them, okay, you're not going to give me the money that I want, but what's the career progression like? So if I pass my probation in 6 months, what's my development plan? What are the development plans for people that have had the same role as me? Where are they now? Can I get a mentor? Will you pay for a coach? All of those things can help. And if you do need flexible working as well, you could ask that at the interview stage. So, even though the job is advertised for 5 days a week, can I do collapsed hours in 4? If that's something really important for you, you've got caring responsibilities, children, elderly, family members, and you can't work 5 days a week, or you need a specific amount of time at home, so working from home and not going into the office, or you've got health needs where you can't go into the office, things like that, ask them at the beginning and see what they say as well. And just, I would say, look in your contract before you start the job, look at the job description, and also look on their website, and then also look on Glassdoor to see how susceptible, how open they are to different types of working and different benefits. Ayanu asked about how to learn about new industries. I would just say research. You've got TikTok, you've got YouTube, you've got Google. So even though you might not know the industry firsthand, there's so many ways to get knowledge about what it's like to work in that industry from other people. And also, you know, communities like CBF can help you. You can find people who are similar to you, who are doing career changes using LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn extensively to look people up. You can use keywords to search for different people in different industries, drop them a message, ask them if they've got time to have a Zoom conversation with you. It might sound quite bold, but you don't know if you don't ask. And I personally have done that earlier on in my career, and those people I still communicate with now. They've been really helpful to me over the years. So don't be afraid to reach out to people, and also ask people in the CBF community as well. Before we wrap up, one other thing I would say is at the end of an interview, you're often asked by the organization, so by the interviewers, do you have any questions for me or for us? Always, always, always have at least one question. Because I remember I think it's my old line manager, when he was interviewing, he was like, oh, the person didn't have any questions. And sometimes it can show that if you don't have any questions, obviously it's indirect. I just don't think it's very fair. But they also sometimes feel like, oh, that means they don't really care about the organization, or they don't care about the role, or they're not imaginative or creative enough to ask questions. So it could be that you've got standardized questions. I tend to ask about the organizational culture. What is it like to work here? You know, what is it like to work in your team? You can ask them about their, you know, a bit more of their personal career path. Like, how did you get here? How do you find working here? You can ask about previous people in your role. So if it's a new role, where they see the role in 6 months, like what does success look like for the role? You're right. They're not going to say bad things, Marie, but at least you're getting an indication. So it's not just necessarily about what they're saying, it's how they're saying, it's also what they're not saying. And with your other research, like your Glassdoor research, possibly what people, how people, you might know people that work there, asking them, what is it actually like? That's how you're going to create and form a picture. Sometimes the vibes of the interviewers will give you enough of an indication as to what it's like to work there. So you literally have to be, when you're talking, asking questions, like you can imagine, and usually the hiring manager's there, like, that person's my boss. What are, you know, how do I feel comfortable working with this person? Yes or no? So like I said, it's your opportunity to interview them too. Serafina, yes, you can write thank you emails. Sometimes it can really make the difference between securing the role, especially if you've got 2 candidates or 3 candidates that are really similar. Sometimes that courtesy can really help. So I would say, again, prepare a generic email template thanking them for their time, save it in your drafts, and as soon as you finish the interview, just fire it off, obviously personalize it. But yeah, ask questions. I would say prepare 2 questions based on what you're researching, your research spent researching the organization, or you can just ask a couple of generic questions. Like for me, I always ask about culture, possibly ask about benefits, also ask about the next steps. So after this interview, what are the next steps? Like, when will I hear, you know, what other tasks do I need to do? That will also help as well. So I'm going to let Grace ask her question, and then I think I'm going to wrap up.
Just a quick one, yeah. How many questions is too much? You said 1 or 2.
I would say maximum 3.
Okay.
So have 1 or 2, and if you're running out of time, at least ask 1 to put the most important one first.
Okay.
And then have another one as a backup, and then have 1 more as backup. But most of the time, you won't usually have time to ask 3. You'll probably have time to ask 2.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. I know we've gone over, but I hope that you've got what you've needed. And if you haven't, and you've got any more outstanding questions, please feel free to contact me. I will leave, contact CBF, and then they'll contact me. And then I'll also got some resources. So I'm going to send you like the template I was talking about, like the job search template that you'll be able to have. And then if you need links and things, just let me know.
There's a quick question at what is the criteria to apply for BTEC entry level?
Okay, I'll just touch on that briefly. The criteria for the different boot camps change, and therefore what's the best thing to do is to keep make sure you're signed up to our newsletter, and keep an eye on our communications, because we'll let you know about when the next boot camps are up and the different kind of criteria that might be applied. So sometimes the criteria might be about being set in a particular location, or you need to meet certain requirements, or achieve certain skill levels through tests. So there's a range of reasons and criteria. But we are I can see people need to drop off the call now. So what I want to do to close out the call is to give Grace a great big thank you. As always, you're always really really open and engaging in the way that you kind of talk through all of the issues and questions people have. So big thank you, Grace.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you all. And like I said, I will, if you need anything, just drop CBF a note, and then they'll be able to put you in touch with me.
Okay, I'm just going to stop the recording now.
Thank you.
Thanks to see you, Grace. Nice to see you, Maria.
Yeah, lovely to see you. Bye. Bye. Bye, Cheryl.
Merry Christmas.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
I can stop sharing now.
Here we go. That's a recording. Oh, it's recorded as well. It's not paused.